Oh, hello everyone. This is Bertold, and we are ready to do Voices in My Head, the podcast where Basil talks about audiobooks and stuff like that. But I'm afraid the intro is very bad today because we haven't slept in a week. You remember that troll that we hired for being our administrative assistant? He snores. A lot. Loud. Oh, that's right, he does, little brother. And I'll tell you what, if you've never felt the feeling of a 10-foot tall, 700-pound troll snoring in the basement of your house, you don't know what a magnitude 9 earthquake can be like. Roll the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I've got Peter Berkrot from all the way on the opposite coast of the United States, of the North American continent. Peter's over in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Did I say Gloucester right?
No.
No? They say Gloucester?
No.
How they say it?
They say Gloucester.
Gloucester, okay. In
That's why I
Gloucester,
get the
Mass.
Boston books. That's where I get the Boston books, because they say Gloucester.
Gloucester.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I've always wondered about that, you know, in the why put all those extra letters in there? Why not just Glaster?
Well, because of the English.
Ah.
Those little English, what was it Kevin Kline did in the, oh, I hate the English. They use all those darn letters, and perhaps in England they pronounce it Gloucester.
No, actually, they pronounce it Gloucester.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Gloucester.
basically, we swiped all the names from England. We thought we were, like, so independent, but we're like, we couldn't think of anything. Like, let's fight a war of independence, and then let's take all our names from the people. It's like, it would be like calling, well, they do have a Berlin in Ohio, I guess so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It all
They got a,
comes
got
around,
a
doesn't
London someplace.
Yeah.
Tennessee or something.
Sure, why not?
Yeah. But they don't have that
We're on
posh
the opposite
BBC
sides.
accent.
We're on the opposite sides of these United States, manifest destiny having spread itself as far as possible.
Yes. Yes, quite literally. I mean, it's far, but you guys had more of an Alaskan winter this year than we did.
Yes, we had quite an Alaskan winter.
I saw
Yes.
some of those pictures you posted with the ocean looking like it's about to consume your home with icebergs. That's pretty scary.
It, we were judging our survival rate based on the one lawn chair that was buried out on the yard, in the yard. For a long time, it was nothing but a bump, kind of like a winter's little tumor.
Mm.
And then, lo and behold, it was 47 degrees for a day, and the snow melted around the lawn chair, and there's grass underneath.
Oh, wow.
It's like a whole world under there.
Make you want to go out and dance and
Well, my wife sat in the chair, so that was very exciting.
oh, very cool.
I always
You
do
lived.
this. Everything makes me want to go out and dance.
Ah, there you go. So
It was my son who taught me how to dance in my head.
in your head, dancing in your
Yeah,
head?
because I would dance in the car while I was driving him places, and he'd be like, "Is there any way you could just do that in your head?"
That's a smart kid.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's been a challenge. Yeah, he's he knows my foibles too well.
That's the wonderful thing with kids. Yeah, I've got 3 of those, and they're yeah.
Yeah.
So
Just wait.
just wait. Yeah,
But
yeah. So audiobooks and stuff. You're an interesting character. I mean, chat with you a lot on Facebook, and seems like you've got a lot of history. How did you get started in this audiobook business? What brought you this direction?
It's speaking of manifest destiny. Take someone who has not stopped talking since, when was I born? Since Eisenhower died. And add to that, a love of books, a love of reading, a love of literature. Throw in when my son is now 22, but I started reading to him out loud 22 years ago. I come from New York, Jewish middle class family, education, literature, that kind of stuff was always highly prized. It wasn't like, it was just part of my culture. It's like my Jewishness extends to the books I read and the things I do, but it has nothing to do with my religion. It's just this sort of sense of New York Jews read a lot of books. Anyway,
Too young.
Tangent City. So I always had a love of books. I read like a maniac. When I was in kindergarten, I was reading to my class. I learned how to read when I was like 3. I had a neighbor who ran through the whole Sally Dickens Jane genre with me. I saw Spot run so many times. It was, I could tell you where he went.
You took ownership.
I took ownership when I was about 3. So anyway, long story interminable, I never let go. I started acting when I was 12, meaning I started taking acting classes. So I was acting, doing little, let's put on a show stuff. Right. But when at 12 years old, I started going to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York on Saturdays. By the time I was 13, I had a manager. So, I found my love. I was one of those people who was really bad at sports, humiliated by my peers. I was one of those guys. I've discovered that whole subculture because I've been teaching acting for 20-something years, and I've worked with many teenagers. And so, there's always that, well, everybody feels isolated until they get into the same room. But with theater people, you feel isolated, and then you realize we're all isolated in the same place feeling the same thing. Again, what happened for me is I just discovered theater very young. I'd been training as an actor since I was a kid. And so even though I left New York, I was in Caddyshack when I was 19. And we don't have to talk about a lot of that, but we can at some point. I bring it up only because it was a major, sudden, unexpected transition.
Right. And I imagine that would really be like, that'd be like a slingshot.
It was, and it should have been. It should have been, except I obviously had good instincts as an actor, or I wouldn't have been cast in the film. But they were just instincts. I had been taking classes at the American Academy since I was 12, 13, 14, 15. But those were, there were some genuine useful classes. It's the reason I don't sound like I'm from Brooklyn. Partly is because I was there, but mostly because my mother was a bit of a Brooklyn snob. She never let me talk like my friends. Essentially, what happened was I became an actor as a kid. I did all the shows in high school. In college, I majored in theater at New Paltz, which was a great school. John Turturro was one of my peers in college. Todd Thaler, who's a brilliant casting person. I have a lot of friends who are working in the business who are all going to New Paltz. It was a really good practical school for theater. It wasn't like New Paltz, like Purchase, which I didn't want to go to because you couldn't be in a play for 2 years, which was a real solid training ground. It was more of a practical training ground. You did the plays, you took the class. Long story short, the summer that I was in between my sophomore and junior year, I was working at the Berkshire Theater Festival as a carpenter, met an actor, he got me into Caddyshack. So I left school at 20 and became a professional actor. I did Caddyshack. I was there for 3+ months. And I came back to New York, which is where I lived, when I was 19. And at that point, I just stopped. I went right into the business. That's not even close to answering your question. But I guess the point is that I never gave up. When I met my wife 10 years later in an acting class in New York, Ensemble Studio Theater, she had kind of had it with New York. She wanted to move on. I was doing a lot of writing. I never stopped writing. I'm not a writer now because I lost that discipline. I don't mind being alone in a booth reading somebody else's words for 5 hours, but the joy that I used to find in writing, I don't know if it's my ADD or what, but I just never, I lost the discipline to be a writer.
It does take discipline.
But I did come up to New Hampshire. We left New York in 88, 89. We got married in Glastonbury, England, which is a whole other story. Left New York, and I went to New Paltz. I went to UNH. I just wound up going back to school to get a degree. We thought, all right, let's move on to the next part of our lives. Let's get out of New York, live somewhere gorgeous.
And so this was after you had some did you have like Broadway experience or off-Broadway experience or just
all of my Broadway experience was auditioning for Neil Simon plays. I spent a lot of time on Broadway stages auditioning for every Neil Simon play that ever came out. So I wound up doing all the plays, all those parts years later in summer stock and regional theater and whatever.
Right.
But I spent 10 years in New York doing a lot of theater off-Broadway, off-Broadway. tons of training. You know, everything. The reason I'm an audiobook narrator now is because I studied as a New York actor with that eye on the prize, massive competition, 3,000 people who looked exactly like me kind of mentality. And so I became a really, really trained actor. I never stopped studying once I finished Caddyshack and went to New York. I never took less than 3 classes at a time. Scene study, audition technique, Feldenkrais, link ladder work for my voice, just nonstop kind of training.
Right.
Jump ahead to answer your question. Now it's 10 years later. I went to UNH. I got a degree in English. I graduated top of my class. I spent the last semester literally just doing a play, doing Brighton Beach memoirs, and writing papers for my classes because I was the same age as my teachers by that point. I was 30. I was writing for a newspaper. You know, I was interviewing my English teacher for, you know, I was working as a journalist locally. And teaching acting. My son was born 3 months after I graduated.
Oh, wow.
And so I started teaching acting. That was in 92. And so by the time I looked at audiobooks as a possible career, which was around 2004, 5, 6, I had already been through the mill. I mean, I'd been teaching acting now from 92 to, you know, it was 10, 11, 12 years I'd been teaching acting, 92, 02, 12, more than that. I'm so old now. You skip you have a kid and 20 years goes by like that.
Oh yeah. Well, my son's the same age as yours. Actually, he's a year older. He's turned my oldest, and so yeah, I was looking at pictures of him the other day, going, "Dang, who's that skinny guy holding that kid?"
Right.
That was
you. Yeah. I go, who's that gorgeous guy holding that baby? But that's just me. It's taken me a long time to answer your question because I'm so old and so many things happened on the way. But essentially what happened was I never let go of acting. I worked in all kinds of jobs, but even when I was, from the time, when I left New York when I was 30 or so that was like 25 years ago. And I couldn't let go of acting. So I continued to do extra work. I did a lot of directing. I did a lot of directing theater in high schools. I did a lot of, I started doing coaching and that sort of thing, teaching what I had learned. A little at a time. I started with a 6-week scene study class and charged $120 and things like that. But I couldn't let go of it. It was what I did, you know. So, you know, sometime I got very lucky in Boston because of my New York training. I worked a lot as an actor, but it was still sporadic, and it was Boston. I'm sorry to say this. I love the town and I love the people, but you know, movie comes to town and there's 3 speaking roles and they each have 2 lines. So it was my wife. Wives are so smart. I don't know if you saw my Facebook posting today, but she wouldn't let me send my picture of my finger to the insurance company with the bill. You know, what she said was, you got to start making the most money in the least amount of time. And of course, theater was the opposite. I was directing a lot of shows and I was taking all kinds of parts. So what that became was finding my way into voiceover work in Boston. And the best thing that happened to me was connecting with WGBH. I started doing a lot of voiceover, a lot of the translation work that you hear in Frontline and other shows where they're interviewing people in foreign languages and the voice comes in underneath.
Right. Oh. Okay.
And I started doing that kind of work, and then Frontline kind of picked me up in 2004, and I've worked for them ever since. Sometimes it's 4 shows a year, sometimes it's 1 show a year. Sometimes there are a lot of domestic programs where the only thing you read out loud may be a court transcript or something like that. I've done that. That became my, you know, after years of working and being a dad and selling shoes and doing all those things that you have to do to survive with a break here, you know, you work for 10 minutes for GBH and you make $1,500 and you go, wow, wouldn't that be nice to do more than twice a year? Okay. Somehow in that mix, after I was doing the voiceover, I don't know why it took so long. Because I remember in the early 90s sitting with Evan Handler and he was reading Goodbye Columbus and saying, getting ready to do a book on tape. That was like 19. Oh God, it was even before that. It was like 1987. So it took me about 30 years to think, gee, why don't I give this a shot? So now I'll come around to answer your question. What is it, 20 minutes later? I'll take the long route.
Well, that's good. You see, you're covering the questions, a lot of the questions that I was going to ask that I haven't asked. You've premonitioned them.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I look at my son, and I shouldn't be talking about him because he wouldn't like it. But the thing is, you look at your kids and you go, well, why aren't they on this linear journey? Why didn't he finish college and get a job? And it's like, well, damn, I went to college for 2 years, and then I took 14 years off, and then I went back to college, and I got a degree in English, which has been so special. I guess it's good because, I don't know why. I don't know.
You can spell well.
Everything I've learned about spelling I've learned from audiobooks. I mean, I was just looking at the words last night that I never knew how to pronounce, things like gunnel, which is spelled gun whale.
Yeah.
And all the words that you read to yourself thinking you know how to pronounce them until you have to do them out loud. But that's a whole nother category.
Right.
Let me answer your question and we'll move on. Bottom line, long story again, interminable. I started to become aware again of the industry. And I think it happened, one of my closest friends, and I drop names only when it's relevant because I don't have a lot of friends. So I might as well, pull out the famous ones. A very dear friend of mine, Andre Dubus III, who wrote House of Sand and Fog and a bunch of other novels since, and his wife is a dancer. And my wife and I, and we were the only renters for a long time. We were the only, writer, dancer, actor, writer. No history of income, and we were the only people renting homes with a family. We used to sit outside and go, here's to the renters, Then he sold a book, and Oprah picked it up, and then he wasn't a renter anymore. So,
oh yeah.
But when he and Fontaine did the tape, and it was still a tape, it was early, it must have been 2000 maybe. He did House of Sand and Fog on tape, and that's when I said, who did you do that with? So that was my first direct connection. What I did was I contacted, it had been done in Boston because he was the writer. I think, the authors don't have to travel, although I know he went out to Blackstone to do his last book, out to Oregon. Anyway, I asked him who had produced it, and it had been produced here in Boston locally. I contacted that guy. He said, oh, yeah, well, we'll keep in mind this and that. And a few months later, he got not a contract, but a subcontract with the Library of Congress.
Oh, wow.
In other words, he was subcontracting from another company in Carolina who had blah, blah, whatever. So they had an audition, which, bizarrely enough, I found on Craigslist. When things were I used to spend my days writing to people about taking my acting classes and searching Craigslist for acting jobs.
Oh, wow.
And teaching acting. I was teaching 2 or 3 classes a week. I was teaching beginner acting. I was teaching film acting. I've taught improv. I've taught Shakespeare. I've taught, advanced technique, which was based on my own advanced technique work. Basically just reinventing myself every 15 minutes,
Right.
And channeling everything I'd learned, and then finding my own understanding of the work and creating my own techniques and so on. So I'd been teaching for a while. I found on Craigslist an audition for an audiobook thing. It turned out it was him. He hadn't contacted me directly, but I wound up contacting him again. And went in and did, he was holding auditions for the Library of Congress. So I went in and I did they wanted 2 pieces, one fiction, one nonfiction. I did Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I was doing my Hagrid, and it was great because all the characters I read to my son before Jim Dale did it, before the movies came out, I was channeling the actors that wound up being cast. I mean, maybe it's how well it was written, but I already had Maggie Smith in my mind and so many characters, Ian McKellen, even though he was Gandalf, not Dumbledore. But I mean, I had this whole bunch of characters in my head that were very clear to me because I've been reading Harry Potter to my son every year. I used to read Harry Potter in Borders the night before the new books came out to the kids, and then they'd give me a free book the next day. You know,
that's cool.
That became one of my favorite things. So that was my first kind of reading in public thing. Again, if I say long story interminable once more, it stops being funny and just starts feeling interminable. I wound up doing that, and a piece from the Something Solution, the 1% Solution, was written by Ron Suskind about the Bush administration. So I did those two pieces, and out of the 4 actors that were cast by the Library of Congress, I was the only one who was cast to do fiction and nonfiction.
Oh, wow.
They cast 1 for each, 1 woman, 2 men, 2 women, 1 for each, but I was like, he can do whatever he wants. Mm-hmm. And there was my learning curve. Over the next year and a half, I did 18 books for this guy. Mm-hmm. Michael Palmer. I did nonfiction books about Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth. I did a book about F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, that's when I really started to learn about the variety and the kind of prepping you had to do. And in those days, with this company, I didn't know what the hell was going on. They were sending me books. This was even before I was getting manuscripts with individual pages, let alone working on the iPad 5 years later.
Right.
But I was getting books, and I'd have to finish writing the sentence out from the next page, so I wouldn't have to turn the page in the middle of the. So I mean, the learning curve was enormous.
That sounds like it.
Yeah, and the thing is, there was no oversight, which is really good preparation for this business because there's quality control, but there's no oversight. The thing I love about being a narrator is it's like being a principal in a film. If you're there and you're doing it, they assume you know what you're doing, or that you wouldn't be there.
Right.
I did have the luxury, I know I'm jumping ahead again, I did have the luxury of working with a bunch of directors early on in my audiobook career, which was a huge help in terms of self-direction. But anyway, so basically what happened was I did about 18 books over the course of the next year and a half. Some really good stuff. Learned a lot. First book, I learned about mouth noises. I didn't know I had them.
Right.
And my engineer would say every time I'd hit a word with an F or an S, he'd say it sounds like a clown nose, across the street. I had a little hole here that I didn't know was whistling, So all of these things that, would have kept me from working in the commercial world, I was learning about a little at a time.
Just jumping up right at you.
Yeah, now let's jump cut one more time. So I did about 18 books, excellent variety, some really fun stuff, and stuff that I wouldn't have gotten. I mean, there was one book I got which was set in India, and quite frankly, I would have cast someone a little bit more ethnic, although that may be small-minded, but it really was, the whole thing was set in India, and I didn't do an Indian accent. That would have been bizarre because it didn't call for it. But I'm just saying I was just throwing whatever came along. I did a book about safe sex for teenagers. Did I learn something? Well, it doesn't matter, but there were certain things that I didn't know girls could do. Anyway.
You could teach your wife new tricks?
Well, we just color now together. We're old. She knits and I knit my brow and she knits her wool, and that's stupid. Okay, so anyway, so what happened was after I did a bunch of those books, and you know what, I don't even have to talk about it. I was still waiting tables at the time because the Library of Congress doesn't pay a whole lot. But because my guy was kind enough to pay me weekly, they paid $30 a recorded hour, or $60 a recorded hour, something like that. $60 a recorded hour. Yeah, so he was paying me $30 an hour. So he basically paid me $600 a week for 20 hours a week, which was brilliant at that time because at that point I was just waiting tables. Teaching acting, in Boston, you make $150, $160 a class. That never changes.
Right.
So, talk about sort of being stuck in a place where you need to get to the next level.
Right.
Finally, I'm sorry, would you like
I was going to say, I think a lot of young actors don't realize that. They picture themselves being the next Brad Pitt or Kevin Costner or something and making $1 million, not realizing that those guys probably were waiting tables until their late 20s as well, and even longer.
Yeah, and I don't even want to get into that. Most of the actors, and I've had probably 200 students or 300 students or maybe 400 students. I mean, I taught acting for 20 years in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my students who were teenagers are now, married with kids and whatnot. And then I've got a lot of adult students who I stay in touch with. And
Mm-hmm.
but there was always one or two who just want to take one film acting class and then go to Hollywood.
Right.
And, you're always going to have that. That stuff gets sloughed off very quickly in New York, but in smaller towns, there's still going to be a bunch of people who are like, that's what I want to do, man. Yeah,
I got this, baby.
I got this. Last jump cut until we move on to the present. It's be like a long prologue to a book. About I guess it was about 2007, 2008 was when I was doing the Library of Congress stuff. Later that year, about 2008, I had been listening to audiobooks a lot. I was a huge fan of audiobooks. I think that's actually how I finally thought, what an idiot am I? Because I was listening to them for years. I loved them. I listened to them all in the car, always when I was driving. I was always driving a lot back and forth to Boston. And I discovered how much I enjoyed traffic. And how much, long road trips became such a joy. So I developed a love for audiobooks as a listener. Then I found my way into it. And I was like, why am I not doing this? And did it for Michael at Soundscape, it was called, in Boston. And did stuff for him. And then I was listening to Scott Brink doing The Traveler. It's a trilogy by John Twelfhawks, who is an enigma wrapped in a bagel. He's he's off the grid, and that's his whole thing, because nobody knows who he is, the writer.
Right.
But I got very caught up in this book and in Scott's work, to such an extent that my son and I and my wife all listened to it. Misha was still in high school at the time, younger high school, when he was still doing stuff with his parents. And then when we listened to the second book, what my son did for a school project was he created a soundtrack. He was really into music, so he created a soundtrack for the second book.
Oh, wow.
I think it was called Dark River or something. And by that point, jumping ahead, I had met Scott and sent him the disc, and he was like, whoa. I mean, my son was really good. He picked out some real – it's a dark trilogy. And, he found some really good tunes to, like, match the tone and tenor of the book.
Oh, cool.
So that was really cool, so that started to infiltrate our lives. And but I jumped ahead. He didn't do that until after I got in touch with Scott. What happened was, after listening to the third book, I just got on Scott's website. And I did the same thing to him, pretty much, that someone just did to me yesterday. Hi, Mr. Berkrot. Yeah, I have an IMDb number of 217, and it's like all this stuff, which is now I'm in a position to pay it forward, even though I just sounded like I was making fun of the dude. I wasn't really, but
right.
What I did was I pulled out. I used the C word, which I only use when it's absolutely necessary. Wait for it. Caddyshack. I said to Scott, I'm not, same thing this guy was saying, I'm not just some guy off the street. I've been in the business for 20 years. This was an email I wrote to him on his website. Do you have any suggestions, any advice? And I dropped Caddyshack. And it turned out to be one of his favorite movies, which is always one of somebody's favorite movies.
Right.
So Scott was really, really, really kind. And he wrote back, and he gave me a couple of pieces of advice, which I give to everybody else. And I give a lot of advice now, which is nice, because I don't fear the competition. There will always be books. I realized the other day that there's many books as there are dead people.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like there are too many actors in film or too many actors in theater. I mean, if there's always the dead people books.
Oh, yeah.
I don't always have to do new books. I started out doing mostly classics. So anyway, I have been paying it forward ever since. But what Scott said to me was, first of all, he said, you got to go to APAC, right? You got to go meet the people in the business if you want to get into the business. And the second thing he said, which of course I hated, because I was already feeling old and needy and desperate and like I paid my dues time and time again, was be patient. And he loves to tell the story about his friend, and I hope I don't get it wrong. I think it's Paul Michael, but I might be wrong. I just have to look it up. But basically, he said he had a friend who was in the business out in L.A. who was trying to break into the business, and he waited for years, and he finally got a book, and his first book was The Da Vinci Code. So I was like, okay, I'll be patient. And it was really the timing couldn't have been better, because I had just turned 50, which was, it's just scary for any man, but for any man who still has no money in the bank and is making a living as an actor and has a family, all of a sudden life becomes a little bit more paper thin. It's a little bit more dangerous. Right. You can see the veil a little bit. Well, fortunately for me, right as the week I turned 50, I was invited to go out to L.A. for the week to do the 30th Caddyshack reunion. And it was spectacular. It was, I hung out with all the people from the movie and did the interview, and it was a wonderful documentary. And because they paid me, I came back that week with money, and that's the week that I called Scott and said, what do I do? And he said, go to APAC, and I had $400, and I went to APAC that week. And 5 months later, I got my first commercial book.
Oh, wow.
So that's the 45-minute story, which I guess that's okay. It just covered 35 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspiring. It's good stuff.
Well, I'm glad.
It's putting a real, breaking away the facade.
Well, for me, the inspiring part is only that I didn't give it up. I mean, I've seen too many people, so many actors give it up.
That seems to be the key is, you start off with it. I mean, I did something similar. I asked Dick Hill for advice after I listened to some of his books, and I was like, man, how can I break into this? And he said the same kind of stuff in an email back, be patient, take your time, get it done, best of luck. I wasn't patient, so I decided I'd write my own books and hire myself. But
that's brilliant.
And it worked. Now this is my job.
That's how people get into the movies. That's how Matt Damon and Ben Affleck did it.
That's right.
Right now I've been talking to my wife about writing children's books because she's been dabbling with that for years. And now all of a sudden I realize, well, I know a lot of children's book authors. I've done over 100 children's books. I know a lot of publishers. Maybe for once I can actually help her out. I mean, she's been trying to sell her screenplay for 15 years, and God knows all of my contacts in Hollywood are, looking pretty dried up. I mean, the people themselves, not the contacts.
Right.
It's just age. Anyway, so what happened was I went to APAC in 2009, and the first couple of people I met, first of all, Bob and Deborah Dion, I think were the first two people who came up to me and introduced themselves. I adore them. And right away I got the sense that this is not a business networking event where you have to start sucking up right away. And it's certainly not, as an actor, especially as a young actor, I and many others give our power away. We spend our years going to auditions praying that someone's going to approve of us, the way I do now in real life with my family. But as my son said to me the other day, he knows my weaknesses. I brought him something. He says, we still don't appreciate you. So he's playing with my psychology, getting me to man up. Essentially, where was this old man going with that? What was I saying? My train just ran a tangential track. Oh, yeah. So I went to APAC, met Bob and Deborah. Met Colleen Rocky, who was one of the first people I met, who was at that time kind of the head honcho at Brilliance Audio. And George James, who was awesome. George James at that point had Michael Charzik's job and was just leaving Audible to do some freelance directing and whatever the hell else he wanted to do, gardening, horseback riding, whatever. And he started talking to me, and in the first 5 minutes he said, you've got the voice. If you've got the talent, you should be working. So I thought, welcome to this new planet.
Right.
5 months later, November, I got my first book. It was for Audible. I had Mae Wuthrich directing it. It was a first-time writer, so there was a lot of attention being paid to the whole project. Then a month after that, I got 3 projects for Audible. And then that was when 2010 rolled around. And in 2010, I did 21 books for 3 companies. And by 2011, I had done 45 books for about a dozen companies. And things just kept picking up from there.
And it just kind of dominoes and builds up as it goes.
In a way that nothing ever dominoed in this business, ever. I mean, my wife and I used to produce theater. She wrote this brilliant, heartbreaking, incredibly searing, powerful piece about Sarajevo back in '95 when it was happening.
Right.
We worked with teenagers. We brought kids in from overseas to meet with them, and we did amazing work. And what she always said is, you do all this stuff, and then it's done, and you're just as poor and back to square one, and well, good for you. I mean, we had to live on the good work we did. We had to live on watching these kids grow up and do amazing things and become adults. But who wants to do that? It's like being a parent. It's like, I don't want Honey Boo Boo doing all my shit for me.
Right.
I want to do it myself. So,
do you find one of the things that I found in doing these is it's almost like building immortality, because the books are going to be there.
Right. Well, it's leaving something behind.
Yeah.
And on the other end of that, which I love, is I remember the week I was out in L.A. Doing the Caddyshack thing, before I ever did an audiobook, a commercial audiobook, I was talking to a buddy of mine who had gone out to L.A. to be a musician, Christopher Mesmer, and he's a rock and roll star out there now. And he had done a bunch of demos and tapes and things, and I had done a bunch of emails and demos and tapes and things. And we're hanging out, and he said, you got to know that even while we're standing here, you're out there. Your face is out there. Your voice is out there. You're resonating somewhere. And at least for he and I, it turned out to be true, which is really nice, because usually you're like, yeah, right. It's like you read your horoscope and you get hit by a bus on the way across the street reading about what a good day you're going to have, But yeah, I mean, immortality, mortality, leaving a body of work behind, that always becomes bittersweet. Because I grew up all my life wanting to be an actor. I grew up watching Gene Kelly and, those, I know that's like, that's the musical theater thing. But, I grew up loving theater. I grew up in New York. My parents took me to see Broadway shows every other week, twice a month, whatever, once a month for the longest time. And I had this incredible passion and desire and this and that. But I remember when Henry Fonda died, and I thought, now he's dead, and all that's left is his resume and his credits. And I guess I was questioning at that point, my own commitment to staying in a business, which was so not degrading or demeaning. It was never that. It was just so hard, raising a kid and trying to do theater, trying to do film, and teaching and all that. And I was like, well, what's it all worth? Where does But I got to admit, I do love what you're saying. I love the fact that, after I'm gone, which I really have trouble with that concept, that people will be able to still enjoy my stuff. In fact, I had a great idea for my grave. I was thinking about a video mausoleum where a different book would be playing.
Just let it play. Maybe you have like a motion sensor. People come up, and they walk by your grave, and then you start telling them a story from inside the mausoleum there.
Yeah, and be like,
cool.
The Cask of Amontillado.
Yeah. Right before my grandfather died, he had patented a time capsule system for burial, where you put your ashes in one side, some DNA samples in case they want to reclone you later, and then a bunch of keepsakes and history stuff with it. That actually sounds like that might be something cool. Put that together, have a MP3 player or something with it, with a forever battery. And
yeah. I like that too. They say, clone you later.
Yeah, there you go. And I'm planning on listening to my own audiobooks when I become senile. So, and then saying, who the heck is that? That's a really good actor there.
Yeah, no, I already do that. So I think by that time, I will have already driven myself well beyond the fringe of my own voice. It's so ironic. I did a book about, a wonderful, wonderful book about the South. It's been a bestseller for many years. It's called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and it's very popular among the thoughtful demographic of people, And it's everything that I don't do. It's like I have voices in my head all the time. If I try to sit and meditate, it's like, oh, I'm meditating now. Oh, you are? Yeah, you're really meditating. Good. You're a good meditator. So it takes an awful lot of work to get this shit out of my head. So it's, so when I'm listening to my own books now, I think it's one of the perks of being in love with the sound of one's voice. Most people I know aren't, A lot of narrators I know aren't.
Right, right.
They're much more humble. They're in love with the words that they're reading. They're in love with the musicality that they're channeling. Although sometimes we're channeling, poop.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we're lucky enough to be channeling art. Anyway, I do switch off and listen to other people.
Speaking of listening to audiobooks, what other narrators do you like to listen to? 'Cause I listen to audiobooks every day, and then I come home from the day job and I do this all night long, and I just love it. But who do you listen to that you enjoy listening to?
Well, here's my problem. I have a lot of friends, or I call them my friends. I don't know what they call me behind my back. I know what they call me on Facebook, and it's not that. But there are a lot of people who I love. Anybody who's watching this, anybody who's made it through the first 40 minutes of this and is still watching it, thank you. That means that they're either terribly lonely or I don't know, or they're just liking it. But the point is that I have an enormous amount of affection for the people in this business. I've made very dear friends. I mean, someone like Dick Hill, who I've never met. We only talk on Facebook, but we're like doppelgangers. The things we say and the responses we have, and so the reason I'm answering your question this way is because I'm still living in the 20th century to some extent. I don't download books. It's also because I really only listen to books when I'm driving. I already have too much frickin' ADD. I'm always either reading. I'm either in the booth or I'm prepping, or I'm shopping, or I'm cooking, or I'm whatever. I don't have the. My brain is just like, we're on a carousel, a crazy carousel, and we go around and up again, around and up again, around a wheel, it's the first wheel, we're on our first wheel. So I really need to be trapped in a place to listen. And so the point I'm making is that I get all my books from the library. So I wind up listening to a lot of people that I may not be close friends with, and then there's a lot of people who I adore as people, and I've never heard their stuff. So I'll start by mentioning the people who I love, whose work I have listened to. Because there's a bunch of people in this industry, and I feel like I've never heard her, I've never heard her, I've never heard him. Right. So there's a lot of people I admire just because I know what they're capable of, and then there's people whose stuff is actually in the library. So let's drop a few names. Well, Scott Brick, obviously, I love his stuff. I love his stuff so much that I got tired of listening to him at one point, the way I got tired of listening to myself. I just listened to him. I listened to everything he did for a long time, and I was like, there's got to be something else. So let's have some chocolate with our vanilla, So, that's a really bad racist segue, because I was going to say Dion Graham is my next guy that I listen to a lot.
Well, it works. It works.
I know. I'm just so. My mind just goes in too many directions. Dion Graham is brilliant. I listened to a couple of books that he did. One book he did called What is the What? Where I was talking back to him a lot. There are books that are so good. There's a thing on Facebook, and I don't know if it's Random House or Simon & Schuster. It could be anybody, but it always says, what kind of audiobook listener are you? Maybe it's Audible, I don't know. And I'm the kind that acts out the book in the car. Like they'll say, she grabbed her, let's keep this clean. She grabbed her turban and twirled around and screamed, and I'm like grabbing my turban. So I do get very involved. But this piece, Dion was so brilliant that I kept saying, oh, God, I love you. You're so funny. Or I'd be, or no, don't go there. It's like those movies where people would scream in the audience, watch out, bitch. I'd be like, oh, no. So there's some people I do talk back with. I love Dion. I love Paul Bamer. I listen to just do one book. I mostly love Paul because he was in 4 Star Treks. So he's my man crush because he was a Borg and a German. Same difference. Anyway, Paul did a book called The Impeachment of Abraham Lincoln, and he was absolutely brilliant. I have some really good friends in the business. Johnny Heller I love, but I've only listened to one thing that I got. It wasn't the library, but I was I bought a bunch of books when we were doing the ALS fundraiser. So I got a bunch of things from friends where I just listen here and there. But I'm trying to think. I'm looking at the books I have. I I really like young adult. That's the thing. I really like listening to young adult fiction, fantasy, Hunger Games. And I'm looking at my bookshelf. That's why I'm looking,
Some of the kind of the fast paced and
well, yeah, it's because maybe the whole ADD thing, but I can listen to it and drive at the same time, and I don't miss anything. I had a little bit of trouble getting through Game of Thrones because there were too many people, and I was just going to get lost. I was going to hit a fire hydrant, and just. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to name some more names. Bob Bray, I'm listening to for the first time. I met him doing the Starling Project, the Jeffrey Deaver thing, and no, I hate him because he's got 6 Audie nominations this year. Sorry, but I can see why. He was kind enough to send me a copy of The Martian, which is one of the books, and I just started listening to that, and damn, he's swell. But some of my favorite books that I've listened to, just to run up a few past you, that have nothing to do with my friends, one of the most really interesting books, I mean, I know there's so much literature, and you get Simon Vance on here and be like, oh, yes, I listened to Marie Trollope's, History of the 18th Century, I happen to really like listening to Stephen King. I know that's pretty basic. But two of the best Stephen King books I ever heard were, and apologies to Grover Gardner who did The Stand, but I had already read that twice and I wasn't about to listen to it. But there's a book called Lisey's Story, which is not one of his most well-known books, but it's one of his most personal. That's my stomach growling. Can you hear it? Just like in the booth. And it was narrated by Mare Winningham. And she's as phenomenal as anyone I've ever heard. It was just a very, very powerful story, very good book. And she was brilliant. I got really caught up in Under the Dome, one of his other books, and I think that was, Raul Esparza, I think the actor's name was.
I got that one on my to-be listened list right now.
That's a crazy book. I haven't
heard that one.
That's so fun. I like getting caught up in stuff like that. Simon Vance I don't like because my wife just gets all jelly when she listens to him.
He has a squee-worthy voice.
I could just listen to him. Who else? It's a lot of people. There's a lot of people I really enjoy.
Well, that's good. And that do you find that by listening to some of those others, as you were learning the process, did you find yourself trying to emulate certain folks or?
The only person I've ever even thought about emulating, and I don't know how yet. I'm learning. I've done over 200 books, and the more I do, the less I know. I may know more things, but compared to what I don't know, I know way less than I thought I did. I'm still every day, every book, trying to come up with new things, struggling with things, trying things. I think I have a pretty good handle as a narrator on the narrator voice, in fiction, the point of view that changes from character to character, the subtleties, what Paul Rubin talks about as sorry, there goes my stomach again. The emotional connection between what's happening to the character and the words that are not to be reported but to be experienced. I mean, I have a lot of good feeling about the way I approach that. And then I listened to a short story, a Frank Muller book, Frank Muller, who we know passed away in 2007 something. But it was a completely different listening experience from anything I've listened to. It was just a short story. It was apt pupil, Stephen King again. I do listen to a lot more than just Stephen King. But he had something that was going on with him, was that not only was he representing through his narration what the character was experiencing emotionally, but it was almost, I can't even describe it. It took that personal point of view to another level. It was flawless the way one character it just took on an entirely different rhythm. I don't know what it was, but emulate, no. But to try and kind of break that down, which I'm trying to do now, it was so, I don't know, it was just so instinctive and organic, and so clearly somebody else's thought process, the rhythms, the perspectives, everything seemed very specifically geared toward that moment and that person. I've also tried other points of view, tried other people's suggestions. I mean, I know there's certain people that go with the. I mean, I do believe that narration, audiobook narration, is like film acting. Subtlety and specificity always brings out something much deeper than just playing the words, just reading the words. I think the reason I get so much work and got so much work right from the outset is because I do have a strong acting background. I know what's underneath the lines. I understand subtext. I understand the internal shifts between characters, stuff you do instinctively. And I also understand that unless it's fantasy or sci-fi or some kind of more a looser a framework that allows you to in a framework where the imaginary world is really more playful and has more extremes of character, I try to keep things kind of on the subtle side. Scott Brick is wonderful at that. He makes the tiniest little shifts, but you know always who's talking. And it's not always a different voice. It's often just a different reaction to things. So I'm always experimenting with not just using a different voice for an older man. It might just be using a different voice for playing around with rhythms and things like that. But there's one school of not doing very much at all, which is, really just, it's almost like the kind of acting you do when you're doing nonfiction, where you're not playing the characters when you're quoting them. You're just finding the action and thought process and energy appropriate for that human being and reading those quotes with that intention. And I hear that sometimes with fiction, and I hate it. I don't like it as much. I was listening to one narrator recently, and I tend to be more generous internally when I'm listening to other narrators. I'm grateful for their work, and I love listening to it. And usually it's only with some author reads where I'm like, I would get an actor,
Right.
But I've heard like this one guy, his style was almost like he was reading to a child, and it was an adult suspense book. So there was a kind of a distance between the actor and the characters.
Right.
And then one time I actually tried doing that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep this really subtle. I was doing a book called Snowbound, which was a great horror story. And I decided rather than get really distinct voices there was a small cast, 8 or 10 or 12 characters, I was going to make the shifts very subtle and just, again, play the intentions, try what this other approach was. And the review was, my narrative voice was brilliant, and I set the tone, and it was so scary, and this and that, although his characters weren't as strong. And I'm like, well, damn, there's always going to be someone who likes it one way, someone who likes it another way.
Yep.
But I don't necessarily try to emulate other narrators, because in a way it's like trying to emulate other film actors. We each have our own personal quality.
Right.
We each have our own set of reactions and behaviors to things, and it's going to be channeled in that way. I'm trying to still, with every book, come up with new and interesting ways to create character that are more based on internal shifts and emotional responses. Right now I'm doing another Ralph Peters book, which is, I've done 2 of his books. They're Civil War novels. So you're talking about 150, 160 people.
Right.
And it's, when you're doing a book like that, it's really good when they die. A good battle scene wipes out a whole lot of problems. But when one is doing historical fiction, the way Paul Bamer did with the impeachment of Abraham Lincoln, there really is a a responsibility. It's like playing, Lincoln in the movie. You want to honor the real human being as well as the writing.
Right.
So there's a lot more work involved. It's like, yeah, this is the South and this is the North, but it's not Barney Google. It's not a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
Not all the people in the South grew up in the South. A lot of them were educated at West Point, which means they don't have Southern accents. A lot of the Southern accents that we're familiar with weren't as Southern in 1860. There was a lot of the immigrants were all first generation. So, there's a constant challenge to being honest and creative. And that's what we're dealing with right now. It's like trying to find, and then there's also the period feel of that. It's like there's a formality to the language. There's a formality to the interchanges between people, not just the military bearing and what comes with that, but the language that was still quite poetic, at least more. There was more language being used then in terms of articulation and I mean, even if you go back to the Civil War series, you read the letters, you're like, wow, people weren't writing LOL BRB.
Right. Yeah, even the less educated people were writing better than most high school graduates.
Right.
So what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into this? They've got, maybe they've done a couple titles on ACX or something, and they think, I could do this. What would be your advice to a person who's stepping in and wants to see if they can make this a career?
For the first thing, really, I mean, I do coach people a lot. I have people coming over to the house, and I'm helping with their demos and so on. I tell them the same thing that Scott told me, which is be patient. Because the thing about this business is if you're really good, you might get work. And once you get work, you'll get more work. It's not like theater where, well, first of all, theater's a whole other thing. Theater's a whole world unto itself, and we're all taking a vow of poverty to be there.
Right.
But, it's not like other mediums where you can work your ass up and still never get a gig. So, I mean, I go with the be patient thing, and I go with the go to APAC thing. I tell people, first of all, get on Audible or Amazon or whatever, Tantor or Blackstone or Downpour or whatever website, you want to that sells audiobooks, and listen. Listen. And sometimes I'll tell them who to listen to, and then I can say, the men that I know who are awesome are so-and-so and so-and-so. I'll tell them to listen to Catherine Kellgren and Tavia Gilbert and, people who I know are lovely, Exie Sands and Hillary Huber and all these people that I know who are excellent. I'll tell them to listen to different genres and try to discern the difference between a narrator who's doing, straight nonfiction and someone who's doing, young adult sci-fi or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I basically try to get them to educate themselves as to what they're going to be facing, what they're going to be looking at. So it's listen, because there's always more stuff to learn. It's really get your head out of your own ass, which is where most of us, spend our time. And be open to receiving more than giving. I mean, that's what I was saying with, when I got on the phone with Scott, and I was like, I was in Caddyshack, can you help me out? And this guy was like, hey, it's like, you don't have to sell yourself. You don't have to work as hard in terms of the industry. It's a welcoming industry. What you have to do is prepare yourself for it. And that also means if you're not an actor, you take acting classes.
Right.
If you're not an actor, don't be afraid to take acting classes, and not just an audiobook narration class. I mean, if you're in New York, you can study with Johnny Heller. If you're up here, you can study with me. Sean Pratt does it. Certainly, Patrick Fraley has his huge thing going with training narrators. But acting classes, just beginner classes, scene study classes. It's all the stuff that you can do as a fiction narrator that you're not going to be successful at otherwise.
Right.
If you don't understand the basics of subtext and actions and objectives, it's like one of the things that I keep reminding myself book to book is It's not the voice, it's the action. The voice will come if you have a real strong sense of the character's need to get what he wants. It's the basic acting stuff. Get what they want, express themselves, what they're hiding. Group scenes. I may say something to this person, but I'm not going to say it to that person with this person in the room. It's understanding the specificity and the subtleties of acting in general that allow you to create characters that are three-dimensional. No matter how good the writing is, and the better the writing, the more clues there are, the more you can draw from. That's the other thing is don't rush, and always read the book first, and write and keep track of everything that's being said about each character, so you know how they treat people, how they're treated, how they're looked at, how their physicality, their history, all that. I think that's some of the basic stuff. It's really just be a good actor. Be humble, because if you're not humble, you'll be humbled.
Yeah.
Always know that there's people who are better than you, and those are the people to learn from. It's not a cutthroat business. It's not modeling. It's not the music industry. It's not the film industry.
Right.
Now I know that there's a lot of crap that goes on, and there's still a lot of politics and money, and this company's buying this company, and things are changing. But essentially, we're a bunch of people who love words. Yeah. It's a bunch of articulate, intelligent, thoughtful, well-read people. The producers and the publishers are already coming at it from a different place. No one's going to get super rich doing this stuff. So there's not this let's not even worry about the art, and the actors who are doing it are just so happy. I feel like I am so blessed to be in a group of people who are really wonderful, brilliant, humble, smart, actors.
Right.
Not just a bunch of I want to be in the movies, I want to be famous, So yeah, I mean that's a bit of it.
All right. So you're going to be down at APAC this year?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll see you there.
That was it? We had so much fun already?
It's already been well over an hour, dude.
Was I funny?
You were awesome.
Want to see my iPad? This is where I do all my work. Look.
Oh, nice.
That's my book. See? North. It says North.
Very nice.
And there's my highlighting. I don't want to go yet. Actually, you know what? I think I might go to the gym.
Yeah.
I put on 18 pounds last year being a narrator, and then I took them all off this year, but then it snowed and I haven't left the house for a month.
I tell you what, I was a bodybuilder until 2008, and I tore my shoulder and had to have it put back together. And since that time, everything that was bulky up here has now become bulky down here. I look like a wheelbarrow with legs.
Yeah, that's why I didn't ever build my body.
Yeah, I'm regretting all those years of training. So,
yeah, I'm a wiry little guy.
Yeah, I wish I was, but sadly, that's not my family thing.
But you're in Alaska. You need a little extra.
You do. It's 0 outside. It's actually and I was wondering this earlier. Weather has stopped here.
You don't have any weather anymore.
We have no weather because
just stays at 0.
It's 0.
That's not
it. And so it's I don't know. It's like a black hole out there. But
someone has to send you guys weather.
Yeah. Yes. We need some overnight delivery, please. I'm actually headed out in just after we wrap up here. I'm going to be driving out to Palmer, Alaska for my first ever History Channel documentary time on screen.
Dude, who are you playing?
That's gonna get to be one of those little reenactors, or either that or the guy who plays the person being interviewed. So I get to pretend to be the actual scientist or whatever it is that they're filming.
Yeah, I did an American experience where I played a pilgrim, and it was summer, and they were using real Native Americans who were all naked and sexy, and I was one of the 3 Jews in wool, dressed and you wonder why they hated the Indians. They're like, those guys should put on some woolen clothes. So anyway.
Just because.
Have some fun.
There you go.
Have fun. That was fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, this has been great talking to you. Very insightful. Very good to see. Because
I'm also going to be teaching with Johnny at the pre-APAC first annual narrators get-together learning event.
Yes, the Heller event.
Yeah,
Heller and Company.
Exactly.
So I'm looking forward to that. I was one of the first people to pay for that. So
Oh,
who knows? I might end up being under your tutelage.
well, you just might.
So I'm looking
all of
forward
you.
to whatever's going to come up over there. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, cool, man.
Yeah. So we'll see you around then. Thank you very much for chatting with us on the show. And it's great. We'll have a good
Thanks
time.
for having me, Basil.
You betcha. Peter signing off from Gloucester.
Bye-bye.
Oh, good morning, everyone. Ready for work again today? I am. Very good sleep last night on the new gravel. Thank you very much.
Well, we're glad at least someone's sleeping, Mr. Gerald. Did you know that you snore so much?
Oh, well, that's the way it is in trolldom, you see. We all do. Now, my mother, she used to snore so loud that it would actually shake the entire London Underground at times, derail the train several times. It was tragic. But, you know, for the most part, there were survivors. So we learn to live and forgive.
Yeah, if we can't get that snoring under control, we'll give you some forgive and forget.